Hey guys, it's Dylan with CT Aquatics, and today we're going to be going through the dark curing process. In our last video, we drilled the tanks and started to fill them with water, and now we're going to be adding our rock and ceramic media in order to get the beneficial bacteria to start populating the surfaces. We do this with the lights off in order to prevent the nuisance algae from growing and taking over the tank. The bacteria will start to populate and will generally fill the tank and populate the surfaces within about 4 months, at which point you can turn the lights on and you shouldn't have as much algae growing as you would if you put the lights on when you started the tank.
After I filled the tank up with water, I just added a heater and the CJ pump that we had laying around. This keeps the water circulating and it will get the water up to the right temperature. So now we're going to start to do the dark curing process. So dark curing is simply building the cycle within the tank, and the cycle consists of building up the beneficial bacteria that will break down the ammonia, nitrites, and nitrates. Just keeping water in a tank is generally not enough, so that's why we will add in a media. The media can be rock or something such as a ceramic media block that I have right here. So I picked up 2 of these Marine Pure biofilter media blocks. One is good for each of the Frag tanks. I've also picked up a bottle of this ammonia from Aquatics. This is what we're going to use to do a fishless cycle. It is a food source for the bacteria because the bacteria feeds on the ammonia. It breaks it down into nitrite and then further into nitrates. We won't have to put any fish in the system and potentially have them die. We'll build up the bacteria before we add any fish. We also have a bottle of Dr. Tim's One and Only. This is the beneficial bacteria that will start to break down the ammonia. So I have rinsed the blocks in some RO water and then added them to the tank. There's still a little bit of dust that was on them, but it's not going to be a big deal. So now we can go ahead and add our ammonia. This is the food source for the bacteria, as I've said before. To bring the aquarium to 2 parts per million ammonia, we need to add 4 drops per 1 gallon. 5 milliliters per 25 gallons, so I'm going to add 10 milliliters for this 50-gallon tank. So I'm just going to measure this out real quick in a measuring cup. 5 milliliters per 25 gallons. 10 milliliters in the tank. I'm going to start with 10. After a few minutes, I'll check the ammonia levels in the tank, and then after I check the levels, if I'm happy with it, I can either add in some more, or I'll add in the beneficial bacteria, which will then start to break down the ammonia into nitrite and then into nitrate. Once we have nitrate in the system, the cycle will be complete and we can start to add our fish. So I'm just going to give it a few minutes and then I'll go on and test the ammonia levels. In the meantime, I'm going to grab the ammonia test kit. I'm using the Master Saltwater test kit from API. It's a pretty common test kit. It's pretty basic as well. There are more advanced test kits for measuring ammonia, but this should be good for now. You need to fill the vial with 5 milliliters of water before adding drops from the test kit. It should show up a dark green because it's going to be between 2 and 4 parts per million. It's already starting to turn green, which is a good sign.
Okay, so now we have the dark curing process going, which will allow the beneficial bacteria to start populating the surfaces of the tank. We do have fish in here at this point to create the waste source, and we've been adding beneficial bacteria to allow it to push the process along a little bit faster. At this point, we're going to go through and start the temporary sump install so that we can get the water flowing through the system properly. We already have drilled the holes in the back of the tank, so now we just need to attach the tubing so that the water will drain from the tanks into the sump, and then we can return it back into the tanks.
So I've added 3 pieces of rock to each of the tanks to act as a cave for the fish that are going to be in here. I've put them around the overflow boxes so that the fish can interact with the overflow box as part of the escape. This clownfish is very happy in here. He's swimming around and eating. He's not hiding, doing very well. So we're going to be adding some more fish shortly, but first we want to make sure that the tanks are running properly and fully cycled. This is all going to be one system, so you might be able to see underneath we have added an additional tank. This is going to be the temporary sump, and it's what's going to combine the 2 tanks into one system. So here's the sump under the tanks. The sump is 4 feet long by 16 inches tall by a foot deep. It's a 55-gallon tank that I picked up at a $1 per gallon sale at Petco. I grabbed it a few years ago and I glued in a piece of acrylic. Now, silicone doesn't normally stick to acrylic very well, so I had to put a lot, but it holds it in place just enough so that the water can go through the filter floss that'll be in the first chamber and then flow into the other chamber where it can then pass over the media and back into the tank. So we're gonna put filter floss in this first chamber. You could use something such as cotton, anything that'll pull the particulates out of the water. You could also use filter socks. I'm also going to put the marine pure blocks into the second chamber, and I might try and put the skimmer in at some point as well. The pump that's in the tank is going to act as the return. So this is just going to increase the water volume of the system, and it's going to get the water flowing between the 2 tanks. Now I just got to go grab some parts from the hardware store and we can get this project started. Alright, so I just ran to the hardware store and I picked up the supplies that I need for the build. For parts, I grabbed 20 feet of this 3/4 inch internal diameter braided vinyl tubing. This was a lot cheaper than the non-braided version. I prefer the braided version because it doesn't kink as easily. Really nice quality tubing. I also picked up a bunch of these 3/4 inch barb fittings to go into the bulkheads. So these are just 3/4 inch like I said. I got 4 of those, 1 for each of the bulkheads. I got this 3-way T. This is going to be for the return line to split the water from the sump into each of the 2 tanks. For the drains, we'll just drain it from the bulkhead into the first chamber of the sump. I'm just going to dangle the pipes into the first chamber for now. I also picked up a bunch of these hose clamps. I already had a bunch of this egg crate at home as well. I'm going to use this in the first chamber for a shelf to hold the mechanical media. I need to get some more mechanical media, which I'll pick up tomorrow. But for now, let's get started on the build. The first thing that I'm going to do is actually start to drain the tanks. I want to save water from this first tank because this water cycled. I want to keep all of it. It's all going to end up getting diluted once the systems are attached, like it's a water change. I need to do a test on this left tank in order to check the ammonia and nitrates. Everything was good last time I checked, but it hasn't been running because I didn't have a pump for it, so I just wanted to do another check just to double check. I'm going to start on this left side. It still had a lot of nitrates in it, but not too bad, because the nitrates had already been removed, which tells me it's cycled still. I'm going to drain as much of the water as possible into these containers. This whole system is going to be getting a water change essentially because the 50 gallons that are in the right frag tank will be diluted with new fresh water. But the left side of the system does have nitrates present, so I want to just get rid of all of the water. Because I have to drain the tanks down anyways, I'm just going to remove about half of the water from the right tank and put it into the left tank. Then I can start filling up the tanks once everything's plumbed up. the water will start to flow from the tanks into the sump, and I can just keep continuing to fill it until the sump is full, and then I can just turn the pump on and get the tanks flowing. These tanks are about 50 gallons each, and the jugs hold between 4 and 5 gallons, so it's going to take 10 to 12 times. I'm going to leave just a little bit of water in because I've gotten most of it out, and the nitrates that are in here aren't that bad. The dilution will be enough to lower it. Now I just need to get the water out of the overflow so that it doesn't leak onto the floor. The next thing is going to be to start draining this tank, and I'm just going to drain it into the sump because this water is going to stay in the system anyways. So now on this side, I'm just draining it. And I'm removing the water from the overflow box again. Now I'm just going to pull this marine pure block out, and I'm going to put it into the sump. These things hold a lot of water, so you can see that it's going to take them a second to drain so that I don't get water on the floor. And I still got a little bit on the floor. Gonna do a little bit of cleanup. So that's plenty of water out of this tank. All right, there's that. I'm just gonna move these rocks back because I hit them. Now we just gotta pull the plugs out of the back and get the new plumbing in place. So the plan is simple. I'm just going to open the barb fittings, pull the plugs out of the back of the bulkheads, and replace them with these. Then, once the barb fittings are on, I can put the tubes on, drop the tubes from the tank into the temporary sump, can pull the pump, put it in the sump, plumb that up to the tanks, and then I can start filling everything back up. So there are no ball valves in this system right now. Again, it's just temporary. So the sump under the tanks is actually bigger than the tanks themselves. The volume of the sump is 55 gallons, where each of the tanks is 50 gallons. So if the power were to go out and the tanks were to start draining, the sump can take any of the excess volume. So we're gonna make the plumbing as simple as possible because this is a temporary sump, and I'm not gonna put any ball valves or any valves to prevent water flow back into the sump. Now is the time to start adding our barb fittings to the tank. So I'll start with some of this plumber's paste. So you don't want to add a lot, but I'm just going to add this to the threads of the barb fittings with the brush. The brush can get gross over time, so just make sure it stays clean. But I'm just going to apply a little bit to the threads, and I'm going to make sure to go all the way around. You don't necessarily need a lot, but just a nice even coating along all the threads. And as you put it into the bulkhead, it'll spread out into the threads a little bit more. So generally just try and keep it like that. So here's the 2 barb fittings on this tank. And if we go over to the other tank, you can see the plugs that were in the tank before. So they look very similar sticking out of the back of the tank, but if I were to put water in the right tank, it would shoot out at the wall and go everywhere. So let's get the pipes in place. So I just realized that the camera angle didn't show the entire sump, but I have the drain lines dangling from the backs of the tanks into the first chamber of the sump, and I've connected the pump back, and now I just need to start filling up the tanks in order to get the tank and system running. So I've got the right tank filled back up, and the tank on the left is drained. I'm going to fill it up tomorrow because I ran out of salt water. So I have the return set up just to pump water into the right tank, which I'll add the T tomorrow in order to get it into both tanks. So everything's going to get adjusted tomorrow once I have more salt water. Water will be pumped into both tanks from this one single pump.
So now we've installed the temporary sump onto the Frag system, which will allow the water to drain from the tanks into the sump and then be returned back into the tanks. This turnover will allow for the filtration to happen properly. The water will be filtered going through the filter socks to remove any particulate matter, and then we'll pass over the ceramic media that we have been populating with bacteria to help break down the waste.
If you like our content, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications to join us on our journey through the sea.